Hi, I'm Mark Byng, designer of the board game in Her Majesty's name, the Rise of Akhenaton. This video is the brief introduction to setting up the game for your first turn. A second video will cover playing strategies and more in depth around the player's turn, but this is set up only. So first I'm going to just quickly run through what you find in the box. I'm going to assume that you've found the actual map board and placed that out. Of course, I've got the rule set, which I'm sure you've had a quick look at. You've got a couple of player aid sheets to remind you about the turn sequence when you're getting familiar with the game. The other items are various decks of cards which will drive the game. There's a yellow deck labelled Operations, green deck labelled Destinations. There is a blue deck, Missions, and a red deck, Adversaries. You'll also have a few purple cards which you can put to one side for the moment, as they will come in later on in the game. And you'll also have the current player card, which will go to the first player who's going to start. Next, you've got the smaller components. You'll have 9 green counters, of which you'll be using 5 during setup and putting the rest in the box. You'll have 6 numbered counters, 1 to 6, yellow on one side and red on the other, used to track locations. 7 pawns, 6 in the player colours, and 1 black pawn for Akhenaton, who's the adversary that you fight. There's a card for Akhenaton, which you keep out. You use it to track how powerful he's getting during play. And last but not least, you've got the 6 companion cards. These are the cards which you'll choose to decide which one of the player companies you're going to play in this game, which will initially just govern where you start in the game and what coloured pawn you're going to use. For this setup video, I'm going to just use setup for 2 players. It does vary a little bit for 4 to 6 players. Have a look in the rule book for how there are slight variations on that one. So I'm just going to use blue and red for this period of the setup. So, having chosen the 2 player cards, Akhenaton, as I say, stays on the table and you put it to one side. The player cards go in front of the players. The pawns for the player cards go on their respective locations on the map, and the other coloured pawns go back in the box. The black pawn for Akhenaton goes on the map board where there's a Regalia of Ra chart, and he goes on the 0 space for that. The next step is to determine, these are the green tokens, the botanical expeditions that are available during the course of the game. There are 9 of them, but only 5 are ever in use. If you shuffle those there's a number 5 on the back side and a letter on the other side. So shuffle them with the 5s showing, and then randomly draw 5 of them and just put them in the location corresponding to the letter. So B is for Borneo, E is for Easter Island, and so on. And do that until you've placed 5 of those down and then put 4 back in the box. So having set up the smaller components and the pawns and made the choices around the companion, then we're just going to quickly run through how you prepare each of the decks of cards and use them to set up your first game. So the first deck of cards that you'll work with is the Destination deck, which is the green backs. And the very first thing you'll do with that is remove from that deck, there are 6 Regalia of Ra cards. Now these appear during the course of the game, but we don't want them appearing during the setup period. So put those to one side and then shuffle the Destination deck. As the name suggests, the Destination deck has a number of locations on them, which is where the missions that you're going to be playing will appear. The thing to know about this deck is that there are 2 types of location card that you're going to be pulling out. The first one will have either a city or a rural location, or 2 cities or 2 rural. So those are your basic cards. The second type of card that you can draw will be one for a legendary location. That will just have 1 location on it, and it's marked by a golden coloured pentagram. Other thing you need to know about this deck is that you will not be using all of it. There are over 40 cards in this deck. That would make for a very long game. You will draw or deal out 21 cards from this deck, and those will be the only cards that you'll be using. If you want to extend or shorten the duration of the game, reduce that but don't increase it or reduce it by more than about 6 cards. Cards you're not going to use, you can put to one side back in the box. These are the 21 locations that will be used for this game and this game alone. So shuffle those, and the players will take it in turn to draw one and decide where the missions will be. Now during setup this might not be particularly significant, but this is also the process during the course of the running of the game, and if you're in the Far East then you'll probably want to nudge missions down towards where you are rather than half a world away. So typically you just draw a card, and in this case you've got St. Petersburg at one end and you've got Chicago at the other. So when the player makes their choice, they simply put it so that Chicago is inward towards the board, and then the corresponding numbered marker is yellow side up. So this is space number 1, so the number 1 would go on Chicago. Second card that I've drawn there is Caprona. There is no player choice there, and for Caprona we'll just place it in slot number 2 and put the number 2 on Caprona. And you carry on doing that until all 6 cards have been selected and marked out on the board by each player in turn. The remaining cards, destinations, are then shuffled together with the 6. So what you do with this remaining deck is you take half the remaining deck and put 3 of the Regalia of Ra into that half of the deck and shuffle them, and then half into the second half of the deck and shuffle those, and then stack them together. That makes your draw pile, and over the course of the game the 6 Regalia of Ra, which drive the end game conditions, will emerge. So the next step you take will vary according to whether it's a so we say an urban location or whether it's a legendary location. There is a little infographic on the board to remind you. For urban locations, so cities and towns, we will add both an adversary, so the person that's going to try and prevent you from completing your mission, and a mission. But for legendary locations, the legendary location itself is a mission in itself, so it only adds an adversary, either somebody that's guarding the place or somebody that's trying to pillage it before you. So the next step that we do is add adversaries to every one of these locations. You will use the whole of the adversary deck, or you'll at least shuffle the whole of the adversary deck. You won't get through it during the entire deck during the course of the game, so some villains will turn up and some villains won't. And with adversaries, the important thing here is they're dealt face down. You don't know who they are until you actually do something to either investigate the mission or to actually go and physically go and stand on the mission counter and find out who it is. So all we need to do with adversaries is put 1 per location. And third deck is the missions themselves. So these are the ones which will only go on the urban locations. Again, you don't need to sort through the mission deck, but you won't be using the whole of the deck during the course of every game. So some missions will turn up, some won't. But these are visible. This is the dossier that your spy master will be giving you to go out and tackle these situations. So for Chicago, we've got Capture the Giant Ape. For Caprona is Recover a Museum Exhibit. For Samarkand is Kidnap the Maharaja. For Skull Island is Unmask the Spy. For Vilcabamba is Recapture an Escaped Dinosaur. And lastly for Trondheim is Blow Up a Factory. And that's your missions. That brings me to the last and 4th deck, so the yellow deck, which is the operations deck. So with these you will use the whole of this deck, but initially you do need to remove some cards from it. There are 12 cards in the operations deck which are for companions to each of the companies. So you don't want companions for companies that aren't in play. So the first thing you do is you retrieve the 12 cards which are companions. You'll recognise them because it will say on there that which company it belongs to and that they are the companion of that company. They will all have a purple top and a bonus. So in this case we had red and blue companions are going to be in play. So we fish those out. And after the initial deal, we'll shuffle those back into the deck. The other companions, you just remove. So there are my spare companions. The reigning deck, you will shuffle. I won't go into what each of the cards do in this deck. That will be covered in the second video, which is around taking your player turn. But your initial deal is 6 cards to each player. Suffice to say, these cards are used to gain extra movement so that you can actually get to a mission, or they're used to combat the adversary when you finally get there, and they also have some other special powers just to make life interesting for your opponents. Once those 6 cards each are dealt to each player, then you simply shuffle into the deck the companion cards so that they can come out at random during the course of play, and once you put them in there, give it a good shuffle. And that's it. The only thing to do now is to decide who is first player, hand them this card, they're the current player, and then the current player takes their first turn. That's set up, you're ready to start playing now. I do hope you enjoy it. Bye.